Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Acosta, and my group and I decided to do research on psychological theories and concepts. So, what is diminished psychological capacity? So, if you look at the image on the right, there are a lot of factors to what causes psychological capacity. So, either events, judgments, heightened emotional arousal. So, emotional stress causes an impairment in psychological capacity, events in everyday life, either socially or personally, which are negative occurrences, so the inability to function daily is one of the primary explanations as to why they commit that crime. So unable to resist or control their impulsiveness, which is important to consider. So relevant to the last slide, an example of a case with impaired psychological capacity is offender Moats, who faced a maximum of 20 years in prison. He claimed to be suffering from diminished psychological capacity at the time of the shooting. So this would be the judges and court's duty to decide whether they should seek psychological therapy or a life sentence. So what events in their lives caused them to commit this crime? So the offender claimed that emotional stress from his social life caused him to commit such an act. So it's important to assist these individuals experiencing mental disabilities so that they could reenter society and avoid reentering incarceration by ensuring that society is much safer overall. Another important factor is social environment. So, psychological events that occurred that an individual experienced as they were growing up, such as neglect and resentment, which links to brain functioning. So, a component to the psychological theory is malfunctioning central system characterized by a low state of arousal, which drives the sufferer to seek excitement. So, a high percentage of criminals who exhibit psychological abnormalities do not have an ideal environment at home or feel detached from their home life, such as their mothers or fathers. So, this demonstrates that the criminal's acts are motivated by their incapacity to receive love from a parent or any sort of social relationship. So, psychopathic development begins at an early age. So, life events are also important to consider. I would like to also talk about self control theory and how this is important to psychological theories. So, self control is defined as a tendency to prioritize the short term over the long term, which is wants and desires, which is also another important factor to consider. So, the environment in which the offender stays, social relationships, impacts whether or not they will commit or refrain from committing delinquency. So the amount of information about which an individual is aware is quite small compared to the tremendous amount of information that one is bombarded with every second. So in this sense, much of our behavior is much more unconsciously controlled than we realize. So a case study I would like to talk about, I interviewed this prosecutor and he stated how there are currently multiple alternative sentencing courts in a place for a person suffering from a mental illness. So if the mental illness is so severe and they can't understand the criminal proceedings, their attorney will declare a doubt as their competency and the criminal proceedings will be suspended. And in that scenario, they will never be tried or convicted of the crimes they are accused of and never incarcerated as a result. And the state may seek them to receive a mental health facility such as rehab. So why is rehab beneficial for psychologically troubled offenders? So if the mental illness is so severe, a doctor finds they were insane at the time they committed the crime, they could plead not guilty by reason of insanity. And after a trial, if the jury or court agrees with the doctor, they will never be incarcerated and will be sent straight to rehab. And once they are found sane, they can be safely released. It is also difficult to change the mind of a criminal, although research has proven that immediately putting an offender in prison does not work as a deterrent to offenders. So this is why I believe rehab is relevant to offenders suffering from psychological events from their life.
In this section, we'll be talking about behavior conditioning, made famous by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov and B.F. Skinner. The basic idea of this is that certain criminal behaviors are learned or conditioned through our reactions to stimuli. Essentially, the consequences of rewards and punishment will help us develop some sorts of behaviors. For example, a child that misbehaves will get punished and will learn to not do misbehave again. And the same goes vice versa. A child that behaves well will be rewarded and he will be actively encouraged to behave like that. That's basically the general idea of that. Skinner added the idea of active learning. He suggested that by actively learning, we eliminate the less rewarding and the more punishing behaviors. Hence, Isaac also proposes the idea of genetic factors that will lead people to certain behaviors. So he gave the example of people with antisocial disorders. People with antisocial disorders generally don't moralize the same way that normal people do. So this is why they are generally more leaning towards the path of crime than the average individual. There are experiments done on behavior conditioning. The most famous one is the Skinner's box. Basically, how this works is there's an animal inside the box and it has two levers, one that gives rewards and one that punishes. There are three responses seen from this experiment: neutral, reinforcers, and punishers. Neutrals are pretty self-explanatory, and but for reinforcers and punishers, the animal actively avoids the punishers, and it's pretty self-explanatory why. And he is encouraged to pursue the reinforcers because he'll get the reward from it. When applied to criminality, it implies that certain criminal behaviors are learned through this method. When a prosecutor was asked about this, about rewards and punishments in relation to some street gangs, he mentions that in street gangs, they prioritize committing crime for the benefit of the gang over any consequences they may face. So the reward within the gang are worth more to them than the need to follow the law. This alludes to the idea of criminal behaviors are more rewarding than punishing, hence why they're still being committed. To add to this is the idea of differential association, which proposes that criminal behavior is learned through association with criminals. When the highway patrol sergeant was asked about this, she mentions that a lot of her cases had people that were born and raised in the foster care system, and through there they witnessed a lot of violence, and because of their social circles they felt compelled to participate in said violence. Sadly, this is a hard issue to fix. Criminal behavior, like crime, is not a set in stone issue, so it's more difficult to see rather than most other cases. And in the case study of the prosecutor, when asked, he mentions that a lot of these people don't want to take responsibility for their conduct and are unwilling to acknowledge the harm that they caused and do not demonstrate regret nor remorse for the harm they have caused to others. This is the sad reality of many of these cases. This is why like the policies are not set in cases, because not everything is the same. But thankfully there are some options for those who are willing to get the help. There can pursue the route. There can pursue several routes like rehab or gathering more info for individuals.
Hello, my name is Anaina Ampayes, and I'll be presenting the connection of psychopathology and crime of psychological theories. To begin with, psychopathology is defined as the study of psychopathic mental conditions. In 1944, psychiatrist David Absalomson wrote, "When we seek to explain the riddle of human conduct in general and of antisocial behavior in particular, the solution must be sought in the personality." The trait theory is applied to psychopathology because it links personality traits to behavior and holds that it's primarily an individual's personality combined with his or her intelligence and natural abilities that determine his or her behavior in a given situation. Traits are part of one's personality patterns that tend to endure throughout one's life course and across social and cultural contexts. According to many psychologists, trait theories of personalities are built on 5 basic traits, which consist of openness to experience, extroversion, consensuousness, narrow skepticism, and agreeableness. By the 1930s, psychiatrists began to develop the concept of a psychopathic personality being associated with the personality type asocial. In 1941, Harvey Clickley described in his book, The Mask of Sanity, as a psychopath being a moral idiot, with the central characteristic of their inability to empathize with others. Part of the reasoning behind this is due to how psychopaths can inflict pain and engage in cruelty without appreciation for the victim's suffering. According to Clickley, psychopathic indicators such as lying, fighting, stealing, and vandalizing appear early in life, often in the teenage years. Other authors have addressed even earlier indicators such as bedwetting, cruelty to animals, sleepwalking, and fire setting. The causes of psychopathy are uncertain, but studies have shown that somatogenic and psychogenic theories can be applied to understand more about the personality development and behaviors of an individual. Based on the physiological aspects of the human organism, somatogenic causes are based on the malfunctioning central nervous system characterized by a low state of arousal and brain abnormalities that may be present in most criminals from birth. For psychogenic causes, the sociological aspects of the human organism are based on the inability to form attachments to parents or others in the early stages of life, and the lack of sense ability to unconditionally depend on one central loving figure. For example, if an individual lacks love or the sense to unconditionally depend on one social figure immediately after birth, they're often positioned to be a major psychogenic factor within the contribution to their psychopathic development. For the case study in relation to psychopathology and crime, the common factors that play a role in the development of one's criminal identity consist of cultural and biological elements, genetics, early experiences, and the social environment they grow up in. As part of the interview conducted with the prosecutor, it has been understood that economic conditions and cultural factors play a role in a criminal's life because many crimes seem to arise from depressed economic conditions, not just stealing to gain money, but also acting out violently against others because of frustration with struggling to make ends meet. For example, some causes of crime are based on political neglect, overpopulation, lack of social welfare and social capital, unemployment, and other public issues. Aside from this, in the second interview conducted with a police officer, it was described that there is an increase in adult homelessness and juvenile delinquency due to the amount of poor neighborhoods and families that don't have access to programs or employment opportunities. In conclusion, there has been identified various personal, social, psychological, environmental, physical, health, and other components that play a role in the development of one's criminal identity. We can see how behavior is linked to personal traits, and from what we learn at a very young age over a vulnerable stage in life is due to the psychological effects one can have towards their engagement in criminal activities or bad behavior.